Hi guys, welcome back. I'm going to be talking about all the stuff that I read in the month of October. I read 8 books, which is not everything that's here. These are all the physical books that I read. I also read 4 books on my Kindle via the Libby app. I had a pretty good reading month. If you watched my video picking out my October TBR, I actually did really good, and I read 5 out of the 6 books that I put onto my TBR. I didn't get to the Twilight series just because I didn't have time, and also I want to have like a full separate video dedicated to the series, so I just want to be able to like spend as much time on it as I can, and in October I just had some other priorities. Yeah, let's get into it. The first book that I read this month was The Night and Gale by Kristen Hanna. This is a book about 2 sisters living in France during the start of World War II and just throughout World War II, and you're really just following these 2 sisters and how their stories kind of intertwine but also separate throughout the length of the war. The younger sister is really passionate about making a difference in the war and doing something that can really help the French army in some way, or just help the Allies in general. So that's kind of what her focus is. And the older sister is left at home with her child when her husband is sent out to war. So you're following just these 2 girls' journeys. This book is kind of known to be really kind of heavy hitting. It is not a true story, but it's based off of a lot of true elements and women who actually experienced this in World War II. I read this for a reading blog, and I haven't put that out yet. It's kind of taking me a little while, so I'm not going to tell you my full review and rating in this video just because I want you to go watch that reading vlog when it comes out. But yeah, be looking out for that. Hopefully it'll be out soon. I don't know, it's taking me so long. I have a lot of opinions on this because this is such a popular book and I think such a widely loved book. And yeah, I just have some thoughts. So stay tuned for that if you're interested to see what I rated and reviewed this book. The second book that I read in October was The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, literally a mouthful, which is by Sangu Mandana. This book, I was not expecting to love so much. I read this on my Kindle, so I don't have it, so excuse the iPhone. I don't really do this very often, but while I was reading this, I was like, oh my god, I need to write notes about this. And I have a whole notes page about my thoughts on this book, which is so fun. Like, it's literally a full note page. So I'm gonna take you through that. So in this book, you follow Mika Moon, who is a witch, and kind of in the world that she's living in, witches can't really be friends with people. They can't tell anyone that they're witches, and they're really isolated other than having a society of other witches that they see kind of on a really irregular basis. So Mika's just very isolated, and she doesn't really have a sense of family or friends just because of how secret witchcraft is in the world that she's living in. Because of that isolation, she kind of wants to feel like a community, so she posts TikTok videos about her witchcraft, which she makes it in a way that like people think that it's a fake witch, but it's like actually real stuff, which is kind of funny. And she gets a message from these people that have 3 young witches who are all living together, which is really unheard of. Like, witches are supposed to be very separate and isolated. So there's these 3 young witches that she gets a message from their caretakers saying, hey, we would really love your help if you could come and teach them kind of the ways of witchcraft, because they're really all on their own, and it's 3 young witches. Like, you can kind of imagine what sort of chaos would ensue. So she goes to this really, really nice house in the English countryside where there are all of these different workers who work at the like house and the estate, but then also these 3 young witches who are living there. You're following her journey as a teacher for these 3 young girls, but then also developing relationships with all the different staff of the house, because they're all very, very big personalities, and she's a really big personality herself. And yeah, let me just read you some of my notes that I had. Oh, first of all, one of my favorite things about having a Kindle is that I can look up words in the Kindle, just like hold my finger on it and then a dictionary is there. Like, that was crazy. I love doing that with my Kindle. And this is also set in England and London, so there's a lot of like British slang, not slang, but like verbiage, I guess, that they were using, and I was like, I need to look this up. When I was reading this, I didn't know that it was going to be romance. I thought it was just like a fiction book about her journey being a witch and also teaching these other witches, but it ends up being a romance with this grumpy little librarian that works at the house, and that just shocked me. It shocked me. I was totally thinking it was just gonna be like cozy fantasy. No, full on romance. There's a scene that is kind of like a little Pride and Prejudice hand scene, you know what I mean? When he's like, Mr. Darcy, like, oh my gosh. The dog's name is Cersei, which is a witch. LOL. But that was one of my favorite books from this summer, and I talked about that in my July and August wrap-up video if you want to see my thoughts on that. I also said that this feels like an Emily Henry book, but with witches, which I love Emily Henry. Those are really the only romance books that I read nowadays, just because I think that a lot of romance can be kind of cringe, and I think that Emily Henry just does such a good job with being relatable and kind of real, and that's how I was feeling reading this book. And I also love witches, so that was perfect. And kind of tying into that, it was pretty emotionally deep for just like a silly little book. Like that's how I feel when I read Emily Henry, and that was really what I was feeling in this book specifically. I didn't guess where the story was going. There's a grumpy sunshine trope, if that's something that you're interested in. There's a really big slow burn. I don't think they even kiss until like 70 or 80%, which is perfect for me personally. And yeah, my kind of initial reaction after finishing the book was 5 stars, because I just honestly don't really see anything wrong with it at all. I haven't exactly thought about it since, but that's maybe just because I don't have it physically. Like when I'm seeing my books on my shelf, I'm like, oh, I remember everything about that, but because I don't own it, I don't really think about it as much, I think. But initially I thought it was 5 stars. Maybe if I wanted to critique it a little bit, you know how some contemporary romances or just contemporary fiction, they try to be quirky? I don't know. Maybe this was just like British humor, but I thought that there were some points I was like, ooh, you're really trying hard to be quirky a little bit. Which was totally fine. I don't think it really deters from the story at all. I don't know. Like, I would love to just say this is 5 stars, but I also feel like, I don't know. It's not the best book I've ever read, so it's hard to say that it's 5 stars, but just for feeling's sake, I think I'm gonna say it's 5 stars, because holy cow, I was obsessed with it. I read it in like a day and a half. If you're looking for like a cozy, witchy little romance, I think that this is perfect. Perfect. It doesn't even matter that it's past October now. I think the book is actually set in December and November. Yeah, November and December. So if you haven't read this book and you're interested in it, I think totally give it a chance. It was so cute. I highly recommend. I think I need to look into more books from that author, because I thought that her writing was like, yeah, it's cute, it's cheesy, but it was really good. Next, I have My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I also had this on my October TBR that I picked out in that video. So this book is a retelling of Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov, but it's set in the 2000s. So there's a then and now timeline where in 2000, this young girl named Vanessa, she develops a Lolita-esque relationship with one of her professors. And then it also follows her story in 2017, kind of amid the Me Too movement. And she's really kind of grappling with what happened to her in her past, because she believed that she was in love with this 40-year-old man as like a 15-year-old. It comes out that her professor that she was in love with had other sexual relationships with other students, and these other students are coming out and claiming that he abused them. And this kind of really makes her think and reflect on her past, and she's going through the motions of figuring out, was that love between her and her professor, or was it abuse? Of course it is abuse, but she doesn't really think that way, and throughout this book she kind of is really grappling with her feelings and her emotions, and really how her life this whole, all the way up to now, has really just been shaped by this specific relationship, and it's really kind of ruined her in a way. While it was so incredibly disturbing, it was written so well. It's written in such a way that you feel every single thing that she feels, even if they are not feelings that are, you know, good or ethical, which is crazy. I just think that it's such a talent when an author can really invoke emotion or really portray the emotion of the character like that. This is definitely not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of really graphic scenes in this, which are just, yeah, it's a very triggering book if that is something that bothers you. So I wouldn't go into this lightly if you are interested in this. That being said, I just thought that the writing of this, and also just the storytelling in general, and kind of her critiques on, you know, grooming and how that really changes the mind of a person, I think that that was done so well. So I rated this 5 stars. I think that I will be thinking about this book for so long, years and years to come. I think it is just a crazy story, and just the way that she was able to write it and make us feel along with the character, like that is an insane talent. And I just really, I didn't enjoy my time reading this, but I can, oh gosh, it felt like I was Vanessa, which is crazy because you don't want to be Vanessa. She's literally being abused. It kind of gave me the same vibes as like A Little Life, with just the amount of kind of horrible things that are happening to the characters in that book and really how you feel for them. That kind of was reminiscent of this book for me. And I really love A Little Life. I've actually never read Lolita, and while I was reading this, I was like, oh my gosh, I like need to read that to understand and pick up on all of the little tidbits that are included in this that are inspired by Lolita. So I actually bought that so I could read that after. But yeah, that is My Dark Vanessa, a 5-star book. Not 5-star in the way that I was like, oh my god, I love this, like this is beautiful, 5-star feelings. It's not like that. It's like, holy cow, like changing your worldview kind of thing. Crazy book. Anyways, that was My Dark Vanessa. The next book that I read was The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. I also don't have that one. I read that one on my Kindle, but holy cow, I'm gonna need a physical copy of that one. And same with The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. Geez, I like can't see that fast. Anyways, The Night Circus. So I read this in my fall little reading vlog that I just posted. So if you want to see me reading that, go watch that video. In this book, there is the Night Circus, the Circus of Dreams, that is a really kind of magical little world in and of itself, and it travels around the globe kind of secretly, and it pops up overnight. It's never advertised, and it is just full of magic and wonder to anyone that walks through the gates. Like, you can just feel it, and you can really feel it on the page too, which I just loved about this book. But you're following the Night Circus, but also there is a competition going on between the two main characters, who are both magicians. So from a really young age, they are bound to this competition where they kind of have to out-magician each other in life. And you see them intertwine with the circus over time, and you see them intertwine with each other. And this isn't a spoiler because it's in the synopsis, but it develops into a relationship where they really shouldn't be together because of the competition. I don't really even know if that is a good explanation of what all of this book is, because it is just the most atmospheric thing that I think that I've ever read. I can't really think of anything else that really tops it. It is so good. The way that the magic and the wonder of the circus is described in this book, it's just like overwhelmingly beautiful. Like, you can just imagine everything, and it's so incredibly autumnal if you want a really nice autumn read. It's just perfect for this time of year. Oh, it's perfect. It is really such a good book. I highly recommend. I think that initially I really wanted to rate this 5 stars, but I did have some critiques with the romance. I also talked about this in my fall vlog, so this is a little bit of me repeating it, but I think that the romance kind of came out of nowhere. This book is a non-linear timeline, so I think that some of them falling in love and really showing it to each other and speaking to each other was kind of lost in that timeline being kind of all over the place, which, you know, more that I think about it, it's not that big of a deal, but when I was reading it, I was like, oh, they're just kind of in love all of a sudden? Like, what's happening here? So that was just one teeny tiny little critique of it. So I would say that my first like initial rating right now would be a 4.5. I am planning on rereading it probably sometime next year, and I think with a reread it's going to go up. I think I'm going to love it even more the second time around, so I'm excited for that. It will I'm like assuming it's going to be a 5-star read once I reread it. Like, I feel like it will. There are so many little things that I might have missed on this first initial read that now going back into it, I think I'll be able to pick up and really be able to change kind of my view of it, which is so exciting because I love when you can read a book over and over and just pick up new things every single time. The Night Circus was excellent. I hear so much slander about it online and I was really kind of nervous going into it, but oh my gosh, I thought it was amazing. I thought that the writing was beautiful. It's super flowery. So if that's not something that you're really into, then you might not like this book. But that's something that I love, and I love setting in stories, and that's really kind of what the story focuses on. So I think that that was perfect for me. So I would say 4.5 stars for The Night Circus, but potential to move up in the future. The next book was Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I also read this in that vlog. This is just a really, really nice, short, not very sweet, but nice, short children's book. So if you don't know what Coraline is about, this follows the main character, Coraline, as she discovers this door in her house that leads her to a complete opposite view of her life and of her house and of her family, but every single person in this world has buttons for eyes. And yeah, it's kind of this crazy quest between good and evil because she ends up getting locked there, her parents go missing, so she really has to kind of defeat this evil that's in this other world in order to kind of get her life back. And it is just the creepiest little story. There's really, really crazy illustrations in this for it being like a kid's book. Like, look at that. I never read this as a kid, but I've watched the movie many, many, many times, and I love the movie, but the movie is so different from this. In this book, I think Coraline is kind of a more child version of herself, versus in the movie she's kind of more of like a teen. And in this one, she really like loves her family and loves her life, her normal life, and doesn't really have a reason to go into the other world. She kind of feels it's evil right off the bat. As opposed to the movie, Coraline is really enamored by this other world because she thinks it will be better than her real life. But in this one, you don't really get that, and you kind of just get this need to close that other life just immediately. This was so good, so creepy. There's one scene in this that was really freaking me out. I love the cat in this. I think he is an excellent character, and yeah, I just thought that this was so good. This is a 5-star for me. It's just a perfect, perfect children's book. The way that you can fit so much kind of like depth and also character growth and story growth into like 150 pages, that is so nuts. And this is just a beautiful, beautiful story, I think. And so creepy at the same time, like, ugh. The next book I read was Sloot by Brom. I also don't have this one, read this one on my Kindle. This follows Abatha, who is living in Puritan, Connecticut in 1966. She lives on a farm with her husband, and something happens where she is kind of now on her own. And in the Puritan kind of society, being a woman on your own is really unacceptable. And she feels really isolated from her family, her kind of family-in-law, basically. She feels isolated from society and from her church. So she's really just trying to get through life and really just live on her farm, and yeah. At the same time, there is this monster devil, Sloot, who is coming back to life after a long time of sleep. He is this kind of half man, half goat sort of thing, and Abatha and him develop a connection. And it's really a story of kind of both of these two main characters discovering kind of their witchcraft powers. Going into this, I thought it was going to be like a 5-star book. I was so excited about the premise. And honestly, the story as a whole is really, really, really good, but it took me so long to read that I was kind of like out of it. I think the first 10% of the book kind of really dragged for me, so then for the rest of it, I was like, ugh, it's kind of a slog to pick up sort of thing, which is really unfortunate because the story is excellent. The pacing is just so slow. The ending I thought was really good. I think that like the 60/80% mark is where it really, really picked up for me. And it was just so good. So I rated this one a 3.5. I think it could potentially be a 4, but just because of my kind of experience reading it for so long, it really just wasn't like a 4-star feeling for me. The story was excellent though, so I highly recommend if you're looking for kind of like folk horror. I think it is an excellent story in that genre. And yeah, I was really blown away by like the content of the story, and I posted on my Fable when I finished this, I was like 3.5, and also, holy cow, how does Brahm come up with this? And someone commented on it that it was a combination of like Puritan folk stories and also indigenous stories and indigenous like folk tales, I guess. And I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Why didn't I think of that? Because there's not really any explanation of like really what the story is based upon. I don't know. There was no like author's note or anything like that. But yeah, I guess I could have looked into that more, which is my fault. But yeah, I thought it was excellent. And just, I don't know, my reading experience kind of tainted that for me, which is really unfortunate. And also the illustrations inside are so good too. This really gave me like Pan's Labyrinth and The Witch vibes, and I watched The Witch after reading this book, and it was perfect. It really felt like the same sort of vibe and the same eeriness, and also just like the witchcraft in that was very similar. So yeah, good book. Took me too long to read, so I kind of lost my interest in that, which is unfortunate. The next book that I read was Smother Moss by Alyssa Allering. This is a debut novel by this author, and I was really excited to go into this because first of all, the cover is just amazing. And I also read the back, and I was just immediately hooked. So I'll read the back of the book, but I wouldn't say that it's like a perfect description of what the story is. This book is set in the 1980s Appalachia and Pennsylvania, and it follows these two sisters, Sheila and Angie, who are just incredibly different. Sheila is 5 years older and she's really organized. She has a lot of kind of, I think, OCD and potentially schizophrenic sort of issues. She's really kind of like the caretaker of the family. Sheila's 17, but Angie is 12, and she is just really focused on her imagination and fighting evil Russians and really just like traipsing about the forest. But then she also makes these kind of like tarot card-esque drawings where they're monsters and they speak to her and they call to her and they tell her to do things. They're just really different characters, and they kind of don't have the greatest relationship. And in this book, a murder takes place kind of really near their house on the Appalachian Trail, which is crazy because this is definitely something that happens on the Appalachian Trail. In reading about this, I was thinking of the case where there were 2 women that were murdered in Shenandoah National Park in the 90s, which is like really crazy to me because I kind of live near Shenandoah. So reading this, I was like, oh my gosh, crazy. It was just really reminiscent of like real life, even though this is so different than real life, which I'll get into. But yeah, there's a murder that happens, and the murderer is really on the loose. No one can figure out where he went or where he is, whatever. And Angie is really focused on finding this murderer. And Sheila's just really kind of trying to save their family, get everything in order sort of thing. She's really scrambling, but she's also dealing with her own issues. She has a lot of, I think, mental health issues. The story, while it does kind of seem like there is a plot on the back of the book, there is not really a plot. It's kind of more of like all vibes sort of thing, and definitely more of like a character study than this whole plot of like the murderer and finding him and stuff like that. That doesn't really happen. It's very drawn out, and I would say we focus way more on the characters and like the setting and everything. Because this is a magical realism book, the lines are very blurred in between what is real and what is imaginary for these two sisters specifically. The mountain that they live on is like a living and breathing thing. The forest is very alive. Both of these girls are going through stuff that you're just like, are they mentally ill, or is this real life? Is this magical sort of world that they're living in? It's definitely a really thought-provoking book, and I think that there are a lot of like hidden messages and themes in this book. I will say that I think a lot of those things went over my head personally. I think this was incredibly atmospheric and I loved reading the story, but I will say that I don't think I understood a lot of what this book was trying to do, which is like part my fault as well, so I can't really dock like this book for doing that. But I will say, as far as like reading experience, I think that I would rate this a 3.5 stars, which is really unfortunate because I thought that this was going to be a 5 as well, kind of the same with Slewfoot. I just think that there was a lot of stuff that kind of was lost on me personally, and I don't have the most experience with magical realism, so I can't really like decipher what the vibe of this book was and what it was trying to do. As I was reading reviews on Goodreads, I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, reading what other people said about it, but I couldn't really come to the conclusion myself on a lot of these different things that I was reading, that I was like, maybe there are just things that are lost on me that I just didn't understand from reading like the actual words on the pages. I had to have someone else interpret them for me, which I don't really love. I have an interesting relationship with this book, I think. I definitely would recommend it if you're interested in that kind of Appalachia vibe and this kind of like mystery, mysterious. The genre, or what this like is kind of titled or labeled as, is gothic folk Appalachia like story. It's definitely super eerie, super atmospheric as well, and the writing is just exquisite. Really, really cool. I also love the design of this book. In every chapter there's like a little monster that kind of, I think, is relating to Angie's like tarot card sort of things, and I loved that part of the book. I wish there was full illustrations of what those were, but yeah, I will say that I think some things were lost for me, unfortunately, and I couldn't pick up on all the themes, so a 3.5 for me. But I think that if you're interested in magical realism, totally pick this up. This is such like a strong, I think, debut novel as well for this author. Like, this is really good. Didn't hit as hard for me as I thought it was going to, and I missed a lot of things, which is unfortunate. The last book that I read in October was Carmela by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This I also read via Libby on my Kindle. This is a really, really, really short book. On my Kindle it said like 70 something pages, but I think some editions are like 100 or something. This is a book that was published in, I think it was like the early 1800s, and it is considered to be one of the first vampire novels ever. It's actually 25 years older than Bram Stoker's Dracula. I think it is considered to be the first ever one, but that could be wrong. There could be other ones out there. This book follows Laura, who is living with her father, I think in France, potentially, some European country. And she's really kind of lonely, isolated. She lives in the woods in this huge house, but it's really far from the rest of society. And yeah, she's just lonely. And one day this carriage comes through and has this huge accident where this woman, Carmela, has to stay in their house for a long period of time. And Laura and Carmela develop this relationship and this friendship and this love, this sapphic love, and yeah, Carmela is a vampire. So you're getting this kind of vampire love story between these two women, and it was so good. It's just like a really great gothic, sapphic vampire story, which is so cool because it's literally one of the original vampire stories ever. And yeah, the vibe of this book was so good. It was a really accessible text as far as like classics go. I think classics can be sometimes really hard to understand, and this one was super easy to read, super short. I read it on Halloween, took me a day to read it, and yeah, it was such a good vibe. I rated this one 4 stars just because I think this is like a common critique, but I do wish that it was longer, and I also thought that the end was kind of lackluster for me. It kind of went down in value a little bit for me because it was like the men that kind of had to save the day versus Laura and Carmela's story was kind of like the bulk of the original story, and then just kind of out of the blue it was like men saving the day, and I was like, ugh, this is kind of weird. Anyways, I do think that it was really good. I highly recommend if you're into anything vampire-esque. It's just so cool to kind of read like the original vampire story. It was really good. That's all I can kind of say about it. It was very short and very sweet, very easy to read, very captivating too. Like when I was reading it, I didn't really want to put it down ever, which is so nice. And that was the last book that I read in October. Like I said, I read 5 out of my 6 TBR picks for this month. And going into November, I'm not gonna do a TBR list just because this month is gonna be kind of hectic for me, so I don't really know how much I'm going to be reading, which is unfortunate, but yeah, I'm just gonna put any pressure on myself this go around. And yeah, that's everything that I read in October. I really focused on kind of like the spooky sort of books this month, and I really loved that. I thought that it was perfect for this time of year, and I had a lot of really good books, like you saw. A lot of 5 stars, a lot of over 4 stars, which was excellent, and I had such a good time reading this month. And I hope you enjoyed watching. If you've read any of these books, let me know. If you have any recommendations for other kind of books relating to any of the ones that I talked about in this video, any of that really sort of vibey, atmospheric, really setting-driven books, let me know because I'm always looking for recommendations. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.